Welcome to preparing for the SAT Evidence-Based Reading and Writing section. Today we are going to be focusing on data interpretation questions, but before we jump into the data, the graphs, the charts, we also need the skill of synthesizing. So we are going to be focusing on part one of this standard. Part one is synthesizing information from multiple texts. On the SAT, you're going to encounter multiple passages in which you have to draw conclusions from both passages. You're also going to be confronted with graphs and charts, and you have to draw conclusions not only from just the graph and the chart, but from the graph and the text, or the chart and the text. And so let's practice that skill today. On the SAT, you will encounter paired passages that share a theme or topic. The passages may agree, disagree, or complement each other, thereby enriching the point of view presented. Often the author of the second passage will express ideas that contrast or build upon the ideas found in the first passage. Some questions will refer solely to the first passage and others solely to the second. These questions will ask you to identify purpose or main ideas or make inferences, skills practiced in our previous modules, so modules 1 through 5. The lesson will prepare you to answer questions that require you to synthesize information from both passages. So synthesizing is combining ideas from different texts. You may be asked to compare and contrast the main points, the structure of the text, or the style of the two passages. Or you may be asked to draw a conclusion about how the author of one passage would view a claim made by the writer of the other passage. Examples of synthesis questions include: the author of passage 1 would most likely agree with which of the following statements in passage 2? You might be noticing that this is pretty similar to the analogical reasoning questions that we tackled in inference-based questions from our previous unit. So we need to be thinking again about, like, what is the main idea of passage 1? What is the author's claim? And then how would he view the details that are in passage 2, or vice versa? So to answer these questions over paired passages, carefully read the introduction. We always want to make sure we read the introduction because it often gives us context about who the speakers are in each passage and the topic that they are discussing. So always make sure you read that introduction. Then you will want to read the passages. As you read, jot down notes in the margin that reveal relationships and ideas between the passages. To synthesize and not merely summarize information, you need to make connections. Think about how the passages are organized, what their key points are. As you read, consider questions such as the following. Do the ideas in the passage support or oppose each other? What evidence or reasons do the writers use to support their ideas? What important points does one author make that the other would support or oppose? Does one passage build upon an idea mentioned in the other passage? In the paired passages on the next page, the underlined phrases and sentences indicate connections that can be made between the passages. So let's get started. We're going to start by reading two passages and thinking through what information is presented in each passage and synthesizing the common ideas or the contrasting ideas that are in these passages. To start, we always want to start with our intro text because, again, that intro text provides us with important context. The first passage below, "What Makes a Life Significant," is from a lecture that William James, a prominent American philosopher and psychologist, presented to students in 1899. The second passage is from Framley Parsonage by Anthony Trollope. As you read, consider how the two passages comment on human nature. There's several things I'm noticing in this, but the main thing is we already have a topic that the two authors are discussing, and that topic is human nature. So now we will want to read both and decide if passage 1 and passage 2 are saying the same thing about human nature or if they're saying something different. Passage 1. "In my previous talk on a certain blindness, I tried to make you feel how soaked and shot through life is with values and meanings which we fail to realize because of our external and insensible point of view." Already we can see that he's commenting that people are oblivious to others' perspectives. And we see that with, which we fail to realize because of our external and sensible point of view, we fail to realize the values and meanings that others possess. The meanings are there for the others, but they are not there for us. There lies more than a mere interest of curious speculation in understanding this. It has the most tremendous practical importance. I wish that I could convince you of it as I feel it myself. So here we also notice this is the author making a claim that this is something he deeply believes, and he clearly wants us to believe it as well. It is the basis of all our tolerance, social, religious, and political. The forgetting of it lies at the root of every stupid and sanguinary mistake that rulers over subject peoples make. The first thing to learn in intercourse with others is non-interference with their own peculiar ways of being happy, provided those ways do not assume to interfere by violence with ours. And so here we see that he's saying that human injustices occur because of that interference. So when people interfere with others, we'll say when people interfere. My marker is not interfere with others' ways. And we can see that with the first thing to learn in intercourse with others is non-interference with their own peculiar ways of being happy. So we should not interfere with others. Otherwise, when we do that, we experience that deep injustice. No one has insight into all the ideals. No one should presume to judge them offhand. The pretension to dogmatize about them and each other is the root of most human injustices and cruelties. And again, that's where we're getting that injustice piece. And the trait in human character most likely to make the angels weep. And so overall, this author is arguing about human nature is that we really shouldn't be interfering with other people. And we should recognize that our own kind of insensible point of view and our own external insensible point of view are to blame when we are thinking about others. Okay, we're now going to look at passage 2, and we're going to be collecting some of the main ideas in passage 2 and really be thinking about do the ideas in passage 2 support the ideas presented in passage 1? Do they oppose the ideas presented in passage 1, or maybe they complement? So thinking about the relationship between these two passages. She was, moreover, one of those few persons, for they are very few, who are contented to go on with their existence without making themselves the center of any special outward circle. To the ordinary run of minds, it is impossible not to do this. A man's own dinner is to himself so important that he cannot bring himself to believe that it is a matter utterly indifferent to everyone else. Here we kind of see how humans are self-involved. And we see that with her actions, where it's describing contented to go on with their existence without making themselves the center of any special outward circle. And then here we see it with the man's dinner, so important that he cannot bring himself to believe it is a matter utterly indifferent, that people wouldn't care, that really this dinner is so important to him, and yet he would find that like other people would care just as much as he does. And so that self-involved piece is surfacing in these two details. A lady's collection of baby clothes in early years and of the house linen and curtain fringes in later life is so very interesting to her own eyes that she cannot believe that other people will rejoice to behold it. Again, we see the self-involved detail. I would not, however, be held as regarding this tendency as evil. Okay, and so here we see the author's own belief on the self-involvement. He does not believe it to be evil. It leads to conversation of some sort among people and perhaps to a kind of sympathy. Mrs. Jones will look at Mrs. White's linen chest, hoping that Mrs. White might be induced to look at hers. And so here we see that when two people share their interests, they develop sympathy for one another, which is kind of what he's pointing out. So when two people share interest, they develop a sympathy toward one another. And that's kind of the, I guess, the silver lining or the beauty in this self-involvement that the speaker is pointing out. We're now going to take a look at the questions and be synthesizing passage 1 and passage 2 together. Most of the time when you have SAT questions for two passages, passage 1 and passage 2, the first set of questions is going to align with passage 1, and the second set of questions is going to align with passage 2, and then you're going to see the synthesis questions at the end. So it's always in the same style or order. Many students have decided that they'll read passage 1 first, answer the multiple choice questions for passage 1, go back, read passage 2, answer the multiple choice questions for passage 2, and then using those as guides, synthesize that. I think that's a really good test-taking strategy, so I would recommend it if it works for you, or to try it out if you haven't tried it yet. For right now, we're just going to answer these, and these are just synthesis-based questions, which means these would be the questions that are about both passage 1 and passage 2. Question 1. The authors of both passage 1 and passage 2 would most likely agree with which of the following statements? A. People place too little importance on themselves. We know this one is wrong, and the reason we know this one is wrong is because in passage 2, it was all about how people were really self-involved, so they were placing a lot of importance on themselves. So passage 2 would not agree that we would place too little importance there, so that cannot be the answer. B, a belief in one's own self-worth is a key to achieving success. We don't quite see any mention of success in either passage, and so that one could not be right either. C, rulers too often interfere with people's personal beliefs. We only see the mention of rulers in passage 1, but we actually don't see any mention of rulers in passage 2, and so that one could not be right either. And D, people should tolerate others' flaws. Yes, and we see that here, like that there is a beauty that he doesn't actually disagree with the self-involvement, because in the end, if we can share that common interest, we can develop sympathy. And we also see that in passage 1 when he talks about people are oblivious to others' perspectives. So he's kind of encouraging this idea that we should tolerate others. And so D is the best answer. Question 2. Both passage 1 and passage 2 explore. Okay, so for this question, we need to compare what they both are exploring. So notice this question was like, what is their commonality? Question 1 was, what is their commonality? Question 2 is also talking about their commonality. So A, personal ill will. B, self-centeredness. C, deep-seated prejudice, and C, deep-seated prejudice, and D, human injustices and cruelty. The author of passage 1 argues that people are insensible to others' perspectives on life and the world, and this indifference leads to human injustices. Therefore, A and C need to be eliminated. We also see that choices A and C need to be eliminated, but human injustices and cruelties are not mentioned by the author of passage 2. However, the author does explore human self-centeredness. So therefore, choice B is our best answer, because both authors kind of explore this idea, whereas passage 2 is not exploring human injustice, and so we can't have that one as well. So B is our best answer. Question 3. In comparison with the basic premise of passage 1, passage 2 is more concerned with, and what stands out to me here is instead of just talking about their commonalities, now we're noticing specifically a difference between passage 2 and passage 1. So passage 2 is more concerned with A, the evils brought on by monopolizing conversations, No, he is not talking about monopolizing conversations. He's talking about how humans are self-involved. So yes, in a way, but he says that it's not, he doesn't believe it to be evil. And so that's what really makes this answer choice wrong. B, generally unselfish behavior. No, he's not talking about unselfish behavior, and we know that because he's kind of highlighting how our behavior is selfish. And we see that with, yeah, people are making themselves the center of attention. We cannot believe that other people wouldn't find our interests to be of the utmost importance. The Mrs. Jones and Mrs. White will bond over the fact that they both deeply want to be heard. And so that is wrong. We're not thinking about unselfish behavior. See, the pointlessness of human communication. No, because he concludes at the end, I would not, however, be held as regarding this tendency as evil. It leads the conversation of some sort among people and perhaps to kind of sympathy. And so the pointlessness of he actually does agree with communication. And we see that with like how, because we're so self-involved and everyone's kind of like has their self-interest, we can bond over that and actually communicate about that. And D, harmless human weaknesses. Yes, this is the best answer because passage 2 does kind of conclude with like, yes, while we're self-involved, it's actually kind of harmless in the sense that it still allows us to connect as humans. So D is the best answer. All right, that wraps up our module 6. Synthesizing information from multiple passages. In your independent practice, in your SAT passage, please remember to annotate those main idea takeaways. Be thinking about how does passage 1 and passage 2 relate? Are they similar? Are they different? Does one complement each other? Are they similar in one way, but maybe one is more concerned with something specific? And good luck.